question. Is there anything about Brett that you would criticize?
Oh, man.
Constructively, obviously, because he's one of your heroes, as he is one of mine. I have some constructive criticisms of him. But I'm curious if you do.
This is hard for me because I'm actually going to share this podcast to him on Twitter. I don't think anything will come out of it, but I'm going to, and on Instagram.
Yeah.
Because I would, and if we get something out of it, awesome, even better.
Of course.
My criticism of Brett, and here is, he's given himself this criticism, so I don't feel bad giving it to him. I think, not in these words, I think sometimes Brett took himself too seriously.
Agreed.
And it affected the ability to make money.
Yes.
I'm not going to sit here and throw the Shawn Michaels situation in that. I think both of them are at fault. And I also think Vince McMahon planted a lot of seeds.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think Vince planted got dissension there that just blew up. And and Sean has even said that he was not the best person then.
Oh, yeah. So, he was I mean, by all accounts, he's a very different person today than he was back then.
Yes.
Completely different. Or he wouldn't be in the position that he is in now otherwise.
Right. Absolutely agree. And I think all accounts he's a great person now. So
yeah.
Really. But I think that's a big thing with Brett. I think there are times he took himself too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurt business. But that would be my criticism of him. But you also, again, now I'm going to play devil's advocate. You, in this business, I think you have to. You have to protect yourself because the promoter ain't going to do it.
Right. True. You got to protect your spot, as they say. Yeah.
So I don't have an issue with it per se. I think it contributed to some things happening.
Mm-hmm.
But then I look at other things that happened in his career, and I'm like, again, he's got to protect himself. Look at what Hogan did to him.
Yeah.
I mean, Hogan lied to him and could have deep sixed him as being a viable top guy if it wasn't for Brett's hard work to get back to the top.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I understand it and I get it. That would be my one thing, and I feel bad even saying that. I'm sorry, Brett. Don't hate me.
No, but I think in a way, how should I say this? I think it makes you more of a fan if you're able to constructively criticize something maybe you don't agree with than you are if you're just going to blindly say, I love everything about this person and everything they ever did in their career, and there's nothing I would ever pick apart. You know what I mean? Because if you're thinking critically about this person whom you're a fan of and thinking critically about their career and really analyzing it, and have actual thoughts and feelings about what you like and what you don't like and what they did that you like and what maybe you think they should have done differently. I mean, that shows that you're really invested in what they're doing. It's like, it's not with wrestling, but with Kiss. Kiss is my favorite band, but I have no problem criticizing things that they've done or certain albums they made that I didn't like as much as others or whatever. I've never had a problem being very critical of Kiss on certain things, or being critical of, or Gene Simmons said this or did this. You know what I mean? I think if you're truly a fan, you should be able to, and you shouldn't have to be sorry. You shouldn't feel bad about, again, thinking critically and having opinions, and not just going along with whatever you think you should feel, but it's saying, okay, well, here's something I think Brett maybe didn't quite get right. I think that's valid, and I think that makes you more of a fan, in my opinion.
My issue is, how do you criticize a painting by Van Gogh? How do
Yeah,
you criticize a film performance by Robert De Niro?
sure.
Yeah, these like they're perfect artists. How do you criticize a table dance by Jenna Jameson? Um, they're artistes in their craft.
Sure. But yeah, but on the other hand, it is all art, and art is subjective. It's not objective, it's subjective, and so you're allowed
But
to.
I'm saying, like, I don't want to be that person that walks into an art gallery and is sitting there just like, oh, look at this painting. It's so perfect, but it's got this little dent in it. That's how I feel I am if I by
Ah,
criticizing Bret Hart is everything he did was just so perfect. How do
yeah,
we like how do what can I find? So I had to think about it. That's a good question.
but I will. So I'll tell you what I think. And again, whatever I say, whatever criticisms I have of Bret, again, purely constructive. I love Bret Hart. Um, my second favorite of all time. Uh, but I do think, and this kind of maybe piggybacks on what you said a little bit. Because I absolutely agree, and I think a lot of people would agree. Bret did take himself. I think Bret has even hinted in a couple of interviews that maybe he took himself. He recognizes that he took himself too seriously at times, and I think that I think and you referenced not directly, but you alluded to Montreal and the situation there with Sean and Vince and that's something I've always been a bit critical of. I mean, personally, honestly, and I think you and I will disagree on this fine point specifically. I thought Bret should have done the job and dropped the belt, and that's it. Personally,
No,
I know I knew you were going to disagree with me on that. I just think that
no.
he should have risen above. I understand his reasons and his misgivings and all of it, but I think he should have just risen above it and said, "All right, well, this is I'm leaving. I'm out of here. I'm going to go to WCW. I'm going to be great there. I'm going to shove it up Vince's ass." Whatever. But I just think that would have been. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad everything played out the way that it did because
I'm not.
I am because I don't know if in 2025 if we'd be sitting here with wrestling being as big as it is today without the butterfly effect. If one thing changes, like if all that hadn't happened and Bret had stayed and everything had been happy,
Okay,
maybe
yeah.
maybe we never would have gotten the Mr. McMahon character. Maybe we
No, we
never would
wouldn't
have
have.
gotten the Attitude Era. Maybe WWE wouldn't be in business today for all we know. Who knows, right?
Right.
So
Um,
things have a weird way of playing out. I mean, there's all kinds of examples of that in wrestling, right? Like Triple H getting in trouble for the curtain call led to him not winning King of the Ring that year like he was supposed to. So instead it was Stone Cold, which led to the Austin 316 promo, which led to everything that came from that.
yup.
You know what I mean? There's so many
And
examples of that in wrestling. It's kind of fascinating if you think about it. But
y- y-
so I'm
yeah,
glad. I'm glad Montreal happened.
I
You know what
guess
I
in that
mean?
I guess in that aspect, yes, you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm going to disagree with you on.
Yeah.
The one, knowing what we know today, and there was additional information we didn't know that was released in the Mr. McMahon documentary
Yes.
about Montreal. And
Yeah.
I think now's a good time to talk about it because sadly, you can't talk about Brett without Montreal.
Yeah.
Um, I think the thing is, one, Brett went up to Sean, and I've said this, there are only two people whose stories have never changed regarding Montreal: Jim Cornette, Bret the Hitman Hart.
Yeah.
Neither one of their stories have changed. Even
Right.
Jim Ross and Bruce Pritchard, who respect both of them, and quick well wishes and prayers for a swift recovery to Jim Ross.
I saw that cancer diagnosis, colon cancer. Yeah.
Yes. So thoughts and well wishes and prayers with good old JR
Yeah.
as he battles this. I totally spaced that. Um, but what I'm going to say is Brett went to Sean and said, we're going to do it at Survivor Series. I have no problem putting you over. I would never do anything to hurt you in the ring. And Sean said, I can't say the same for you. At that point, Brett was within his rights to say, no way am I doing this.
Mhm.
And think about this. Everything Bret Hart had done for that company leading up to that,
Yeah.
he had never said no to doing a job.
Yeah.
Never said no to
True.
anything.
True.
He said no to that.
Yeah.
And what we found out in the Mr. McMahon documentary is Vince's complaint about the whole thing. All these many, many years later, this was just made public knowledge. Vince has always said, I was afraid he was going to do an Alundra Blaze and take the belt to WCW and drop it in the garbage can and disrespect our title. And that can happen to the women's title, but it can't happen to our belt. Never would have happened because Brett was still under contract.
Right. He wouldn't have been legally able to do that anyway.
And Eric Bischoff was getting hit with lawsuits. Well, not Eric Bischoff directly, Turner, by WWE, and they wanted no part of lawsuits from Titan Sports.
Yeah.
After that. So that would never have happened.
Yeah.
So Vince knew that.
Yeah.
Brett gave a 30-day notice.
Yeah.
Or I think it was a 60-day. It was either a 30, 60, or 90-day notice that he was breaking his contract. Regardless, the contract went through until December 12th. They could have had Brett drop the title at any point.
Well, that's a fair point. They should, and that's what they should have done to avoid all the mess.
Any point.
Yeah.
Following that, and I agree with you on the butterfly effect scenario, and everything you said is spot on.
Yeah.
I'm saying just from the standpoint of being a Bret Hart fan,
yeah,
that there was a better way to do that. And that now knowing a year ago or 2 years ago, whenever the documentary was released, and this just shows what a stand-up guy Bret the Hitman Hart is. He never wrote about that in his book.
right.
He's never said that in an interview. He is that wasn't even in the documentary Wrestling with Shadows.
Yeah.
That was uncovered by a random journalist who had a copy of Bret Hart's contract.
Yeah.
So all these people out here saying all Bret has done is whine about Montreal. How many times have you been screwed over by a job? How many times have you been screwed over by a place that you've given your heart and your soul to? Let alone your body and your blood and your sweat to.
Yeah.
No. There is no, again, butterfly effect notwithstanding. There is no reason you can give me, especially knowing that new piece of information, that makes what Vincent Kennedy McMahon did that night justifiable.
All right, I am going to offer a counterpoint. Oh, and I don't want to be in the position of defending Vince, especially with all that we know now. Oh my God.
Right.
But trying to put myself in his position. So I agree. I mean, you're right. They could have avoided it all by having Brett drop the belt to some. I mean, I remember Brett, I think it was in Wrestling with Shadows, he even says, I'll drop it to the Brooklyn Brawler. I don't care. I'm just not dropping it to Sean in Canada.
Right.
If Brett had gotten here's the problem for Vince. Vince is getting his ass kicked by WCW. Obviously, the company's struggling for money because they can't honor Brett's contract. He told Brett, we're going to intentionally breach the contract if we have to, because we have no other option, financial peril, all of that. Now, so Vince is already getting his ass kicked. And now if he capitulates to Brett, because Brett doesn't want to drop the belt to Sean in Montreal, now everyone the people who Vince has under contract still, who are still with WWE, who are probably going to go to WCW as soon as they can, as soon as that Brinks truck pulls up in front of their driveway, and they have a chance to. Now they know. Now Vince has shown weakness. Now Vince has shown, if you've got him backed into a corner, oh, Vince isn't so tough after all. You can push him around. And he let Brett push him around. Now I can push him around too. I can put my foot down and say, no, Vince, I'm not doing this. See that, and I think Vince, from his perspective, felt like I have to do this because I can't look weak. And Eric, you got to admit, he would look weak, wouldn't he, to the rest of the guys in the company if he had given Brett his way. What would that have done in terms of Vince's ability to run the company at that point?
One key fact we're missing from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand your thought process there.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing, but there's a key fact. Brett had something in his contract no one else had.
I'm glad you brought that up.
He had creative control over his final 30 days. And
yes.
So if people want to say, well, he pushed Vince around, no, Vince was still the contract is the contract.
Yeah.
They breached it. Brett could opt out. Brett did. But the terms of the contract are still there. Brett's just opting out, giving the company an out. But the terms over everything else are still valid. The 30 days of creative control. Brett had that. If you don't think the boys in the locker room knew that Brett had that, I would.
Well, everybody knew. Yeah. Because that was being reported at the time. That was a big part of the story. Another counterpoint, though, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering it correctly, it was described as, I think this is the exact wording in the contract, but I could be wrong. Reasonable creative control. Reasonable meaning like Brett couldn't say, for example, he couldn't demand anything that would be deemed unreasonable. So there's some ambiguity there. So Brett couldn't go to Vince and say
some.
Well, Brett couldn't go to Vince and say, so I have creative control over my last 30 days. So in the last 30 days, I'm not only keeping the world title, but I'm also going to win the Intercontinental title, and I'm going to have a tag partner and win the. I have creative control, so I can do that. Reasonable creative control, meaning that. Well, I mean, again, that's ambiguous, right? I wish we had a lawyer with us on the show.
Yeah, but that's very ambiguous.
That's very ambiguous. So then, if that's in there, if that word reasonable appears there, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I have no legal background at all, but it seems to me like, so then you then get into a debate about, well, what is reasonable?
Is it reasonable? Is it reasonable to have a Canadian hero lose to his greatest rival in Canada? Is that reasonable?
I don't know. Well, that's the thing.
That's exactly. Is so no.
But from the other side, Eric, is it reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable for the champion to be able to tell the promoter, no, I'm not losing the title on that date in that city on that event? Is that reasonable?
It is if he gives an alternative that is feasible.
Is it?
He gave an alternative. He said you could have me drop it to Shamrock. Now,
true. Yeah.
To prove I'm not all Team Brett here, Brett's idea, I'll just go next night to Ottawa and drop the title to you and give it up.
Oh, I hated that idea. Oh, that idea was awful.
That's absolutely awful. You can't have your champion come in and be like, I'm out. I'm going.
Oh yeah, that would have been.
Here's your belt.
Yeah, because I know that was one of the alternatives Brett offered, and that would have been horrible.
No. You have to drop it to somebody.
Yeah.
Now, now I go back. Sean, no, because Sean did not show Brett the respect that he deserved.
I agree there. I agree with that.
And so then we circle back to what do we do?
Yeah.
Um, I think I think Vince knew the whole time what he was going to do. He just had to get key players on board with it. And look, people can sit here and say, I came up with the idea with the Montreal screw job. I came up with the idea for it. I came up with the idea for it. I think Vince knew by hook or by crook, Bret Hart is not winning this match. He just needed to find out the way.
Oh yeah. No, I
And
agree. Yeah. Yeah.
to find out the way, he needed someone who knew the business of professional wrestling like the back of his hand. That person is not the king of bros as as he says constantly.
Right.
It had to be a historian of the business. So the two people I'm willing to give credence to that they came up with it is Jim Cornette
Hmm.
and Paul Triple H Levesque.
Well, Cornette did claim, right, that he came up with it.
Cornette claimed on Dark Side of the Ring that yes, he
Yeah.
came up with screwing him over.
And Cornette,
Based
we've never known Cornette to be dishonest, right?
no, no,
Yeah.
but I
So I
also
believe him.
believe Triple H in a meeting said if he won't do business, then fuck him, we'll do business for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that those two, I think Jim Cornette came up with the idea. And this is me theorizing here. I
Yeah.
think Jim Cornette came up with the idea and exactly how we're going to do it. And I think Triple H galvanized it.
Yeah.
To hear one of the boys in the locker room say, ask him,
Good point.
let's do business for him, I think locked it in. And Vince was like, this is what we're going to do.
I think you're onto something there. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So I don't think I'll say his name, Vince Russo. You couldn't come up with this if it was spelled out for you.
Right.
No. It had to be someone Brett respected to propose. We're going to let Sean put you in your finish.
Mm-hmm.
So Pat Patterson had to be in the know on this. Pat Patterson had to know.
Yeah.
So I agree. The circle was small.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think what we have now is that Sean knew, Hunter knew, Vince knew, Pat Patterson knew, and Jim Cornette knew. I think those are the five. I don't think Jim Ross knew, and I don't think Bruce Pritchard knew. And I think Vince Russo was just trying to figure out what he was doing in Canada. So he had no clue. So yeah, I mean, I think those are the five that knew.
You know, there are people who to this day claim that, and you and I, we're not people who are, yeah, I can tell by the look on your face. You already know what I'm about to ask you. You and I are not,
is not a word.
You and I are not people who are susceptible to conspiracy theories, but so I don't know. I don't believe it's a work either, and I never have. There is there is one piece of evidence.
I know. I think I know where you're going with this because I think I know what you're going to bring up, but I want to hear it.
Okay. The one thing that I've always wondered about, and, you know, we did talk earlier about how some, you know, the butterfly effect, and sometimes in wrestling things just work out. And a lot of things worked out in the aftermath of this. But one of the things that worked out really well is that Wrestling with Shadows documentary that you mentioned earlier, a documentary about Bret Hart in at that time, still the WWF, which I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to have seen and been interested in, people who are fans of Bret Hart. Otherwise, it might not have a huge appeal to a large audience. But if you're a fan of Bret Hart and you're a wrestling fan, you might like to see this. And it just so happens,
You're not
that
going where I thought you were going.
Oh, I'll be curious afterward to hear where you thought I was going. But it just so happens that this documentary has a pretty climactic ending that no one anticipated or thought or could have possibly seen coming. But it all just works out so perfectly for this documentary that it ends with the Montreal Screwjob. And again, just to be clear, I'm not saying that I think that means it might have been a work. I don't think it was a work. I think that was just a very, very happy accident and coincidence. But my God, the guy, what's his name? Barry something? No, Barry did
Paul J.
Who is it?
Paul J is the director of
Paul
wrestling.
J. Paul J might be the luckiest son of a bitch who ever made a documentary to have that work out that way. And again, I do believe it was a coincidence and it just happened to work out that way. But my God, what a lucky guy he is to have that work out that way. So I will say that. Okay. So that's the one thing that always kind of made me go, yeah, that is interesting.
And that's such a good point. But you've opened the door for me to break into my mental wrestling Rolodex in my head.
Yeah.
I have a counter to that.
Okay.
So Conrad Thompson brought that up to Bruce Pritchard.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Okay. I haven't listened to those in a while.
Where they talked about either Survivor Series 97 as an event or just Bret Hart in 97. It was one of them. And Bruce said this, and it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. When WWE gives you credentials, they give it to you for an event or for a specific amount of time.
Yeah.
When they were approached about the documentary, they were told it would be a 1-year shoot.
Okay.
So, originally, the documentary was going to end with Bret Hart faxing his letter.
Oh, I remember that scene. Yeah.
What happens after that? They stopped filming.
Yeah.
But Bret called Paul J. And Paul J, this comes from Paul J in interviews.
Yeah.
Bret had called Paul J and said, hey, there's something interesting going on here.
I didn't know this. I didn't know this part.
There's something interesting going on here. I'm greatly paraphrasing here.
Yeah.
There's an issue with my last night. They want me to do this with Sean. I don't want to do this. It's going to be my last night in WWE. Do you want to come film? Well, lo and behold, we still have these press passes that they never revoked.
I'll be damned.
Sure, we'll fly up and film this. And over time, things have gotten more contentious.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know about this. I didn't know about the phone call from Bret to Paul J. I never knew that. That's okay. Well, that does explain a lot, though.
So they get there at the Molson Center in Montreal.
Yeah.
And the people at Montreal let them in because they're good credentials.
Yeah.
What are you going to say? No or wait? They didn't know.
Right.
What was going on. So they just let them in.
Yeah.
And by the time everyone figured out, they'd already filmed footage.
Yeah.
They never knew Bret was bugged going into the meeting with Vince.
Yeah, they didn't know he was wearing a wire.
Yeah.
For the documentary. And why would they? Why would anyone suspect that even, Nobody's patting him down. They're not in the mafia.
My understanding is that they didn't even know the documentary crew was there when they had that meeting with Vince.
Wow.
They had no clue.
Well, I can see that happening, though. It's busy. There's a lot of people around.
Exactly. Yeah. We talked about it at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
And now, as a promoter, you have this giant cluster to work out.
Yeah.
knowing that you're screwing over quite possibly your greatest superstar ever, not named Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
You're going to be a villain. You're going to be hated. You don't know the effect it's going to have on your business. Why
Yeah.
are you paying attention to, no offense to Paul J, this rinky dink production crew?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's exactly why
Mm,
it happened.
that makes sense.
It was pure dumb luck that they
Yeah.
still had the credentials.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that really, that explains that. Now, where did you, cause you said you thought you knew where I was going. Where did you
I
think I was going?
One of my favorite scenes in Dark Side of the Ring happens at the end of the Montreal episode. And it's Scott Hall breaking down the finish and why he thinks it's a work.
Okay.
And I thought you were going to reference that moment as someone who knows Sean very well, is one of the smartest minds, the late, great Scott Hall, Razor
Yep.
Ramon, one of the greatest minds in the business, can break it down like that. It's got to be a work.
Huh.
And the one thing I will say that Scott did not bring up,
Yeah.
and I never noticed this till I watched the Sean and Brett graded rivalries WWE home video release. But Sean goes to put the sharpshooter on wrong.
Yeah.
He uses the wrong leg, and Brett tells him switch legs,
Yep.
and you see Sean switch legs
Yeah.
to put it on right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I don't understand. Yeah, and I remember him saying that when I watched that Dark Side of the Ring, but I don't understand because Brett's even talked about that. Like, yeah, Sean didn't even know how to put the sharpshooter on the right way. I had to help him. Like, what is that? I mean,
I again, I thought you were going to reference the fact that if
yeah,
Scott
no,
Hall might know something we don't because of his friendship with Sean and
yeah,
Hunter,
yeah, nah,
and his ability to break it down like he did. But my
nah.
point was going to be he missed that key point. If it was a work, why would Brett? If
Oh, I see what you're saying.
If Brett knew that he was about to get screwed and just was going to go out and didn't care,
Right,
he wouldn't have told Sean, "You're
right.
putting it
You're
on
right.
wrong."
You're
He
right.
would have
Okay,
let
so that's
Sean
what,
just fall on his face.
and that's the part that Scott Hall missed. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Scott
No,
totally
you're right.
missed that.
You're right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.